Thanks, Skylar. So now that we've discussed benefits connection to the employee value proposition, we'd like to shift over to focusing on the way that benefits are allocated and communicated across different employee populations. So firstly, we were very interested in our research in the way that benefits may be experienced differently by employees in different demographics and roles within the organization. So we first asked our participants what the primary factors they used to segment employees when strategizing and allocating benefits. What we found is that organizations use a multitude of factors when strategizing benefits, but the most salient factor of segmentation was employee level, followed by employee tenure and geographic location. So after discussing the factors used to segment employees, we wanted to better understand how much communication was changed based on those factors. And what we discovered is that the majority of our participants changed their benefits communication strategy somewhat based on the employee segment that they are looking to target. So ultimately, what we found is that the major difference in the way that benefits are experienced differently in different employee groups is in the way that they are communicated rather than the way that they are allocated. With some minor exceptions, typically all employees who are benefits eligible had access to the same set of benefits no matter their role in the organization. But the way that benefits were communicated was different based on the factors below. So whether they were a production or a desk employee, union versus non-union, et cetera, we found some variation in communication across these groups. So we also explored the idea of customization in benefits, and we found that this is a relatively divided topic. Some feel that customization is unpractical, especially in the US, due to size of organizations, costs, and administrative concerns, while others felt that they really wanted to meet baseline access for all employees in terms of equitable care, and doing that first before moving on to customization. Some felt that customization to a certain extent is necessary for inclusion and creating equity across employee groups. But what we heard most commonly with regards to customization is that since organizations tend to offer so many benefits and work with a multitude of vendors, employees tend to already have a decent amount of choice in what they choose to utilize and engage with. So even if benefits are not being specifically customized to an individual and their unique needs, employees tend to have choice in what they choose to utilize. So it mirrors customization in that sense. So tapping into the idea of communication and the way it's done differently across employee groups, the main differences we saw were across production and retail workers versus office workers. But there is some overlap in communication strategies that were used. So communication is really critical to drive utilization and guide employees to the benefits they need when they need them. And communication is often personalized and changed based on the targeted employee population. So the main driver of these differences is that office workers typically have access to email all day, access to a computer and other technology, while typically production and retail workers are not on email for the majority of their day, and they may not have access to a computer and other technology. So that being said, production and retail communication tends to be more hands-on. The communication tends to be driven from managers and supervisors. There tends to be posters and digital billboards around sites, factories, stores, et cetera, and they tend to utilize home mailers more. While for office workers, this tends to be more employee-driven, where the employee is seeking out the communication that they are looking for. It's more tech-driven, so emails, Slack for more informal communication, digital newsletters, webcasts, et cetera. Those are all great ways to engage and communicate with office workers. But there is some overlap in these strategies. Storytelling works really well for any employees. If a particular employee has a really impactful experience with a particular benefit, utilizing employee testimonials is a really great strategy. Informal word of mouth, in-person presentations, as well as at-home marketing are all ways that tend to work for either production or office workers. So as Skylar mentioned, when we were talking about challenges, communication represents the largest challenge that we saw in our participants when it comes to regards to the benefit space. But there are some strategies to combat some of these challenges. So firstly, having many benefits can be overwhelming for employees to understand. So keeping communication short and sweet to avoid overburdening employees with information can be a strategy to combat this. Knowing which benefits apply to you in the moment can be difficult. So a strategy for this is to organize benefits into moments to simplify benefits and connect it back to the EVP. So for example, having on your company intranet a section about family building or retirement, and having all of the relevant benefits that relate to that moment in someone's life can be a great way to organize benefits. As we know, employees already tend to be inundated with communication, so keeping communication limited to weekly or monthly communication just to highlight key information can be important here. Additionally, we saw the importance of involving family members by sending communication via mail to the household. We tend to saw that benefits decision makers often are not the actual employee, but perhaps someone else at home. So involving family members was a really great way to drive utilization. Additionally, by personalizing communication based on employee demographics and data, that can really help the fact that each employee has a distinct need and desire for the way they'd like to engage with benefits. And lastly, guiding employees to a one-stop shop benefits portal can be great because information is sometimes difficult to find. So keeping it in one place for employees to engage with is a great strategy. And finally, we wanted to really understand what worked best for encouraging broad utilization of particular benefits. So some benefits, like certain healthcare treatments, you really hope are not highly needed and not highly utilized by your organization. But for some benefits, especially those linked with positive business outcomes, encouraging utilization is really important. So some of the strategies to do so is through employee testimonials, like I spoke about, having communication come from the top down from leadership, town halls, personalization, automation via auto rollover. These are all great ways to encourage utilization. A relatively newer idea that we saw from our participants is a benefits concierge, whether that's an internal employee or comes from a vendor. Giving employees someone to speak to walk them through the benefits that are available to them and how to best use them can be great in pointing employees in the right direction to get what they need when they need it. And lastly, high impact benefits can really lead to employees driving utilization for other employees themselves. So again, storytelling due to just informal word of mouth or formal storytelling can be great, as well as role modeling from other senior leaders speaking about particular benefits. These methods of encouragement are particularly important for more stigmatized benefits, such as mental health and well-being benefits. We saw that our participants really would like their employees to utilize these benefits, but they tend to be stigmatized. So using storytelling and role modeling can be really great for driving utilization here. But now that we've discussed the ways to best communicate benefits, we'll move on to ways that we can measure success in this space.
Thank you, Mia. So when it comes to actually measuring the success of benefits, we collected information about these three major categories of feedback mechanisms. So there's staple metrics, the ones that we've seen traditionally, there's various employee mechanisms, and then there's external sources of that feedback. So when it comes to the staple metrics, we're all familiar with engagement, utilization, benefits costs, such as total medical spend, but we wanted to call out the last three bullets there. So process and outcome measures could also be a source of valuable feedback collection. So looking at the actual benefit itself and the targeted outcome and tracking that there. So for example, time off granted due to a physical injury and looking at the amount of time that it takes for one to return to work. Then there's also user impact, which we've mentioned with regards to high impact benefits, which we'll get into more in a bit, but actually capturing what the unique individual level impacts are and going in depth there. And then also ROI is something that came up quite frequently, but interestingly in two different ways. So we had some companies that were ROI averse and some that were ROI appreciative. And so for those that were averse, it was for two primary reasons. Firstly, the idea that ROI is kind of counter to the idea of benefits being a principled way to engage in improving employee life, right? The idea being benefits could demand a why, but never an ROI, for example, was stated. And then the other major issue with ROI being that it is difficult to measure and define in some ways. So going off of that, with the ROI appreciative companies, they were able to capture or appreciate the idea of capturing outcomes like productivity payout, and also wanted to learn more about how to better measure ROI for the sake of being able to better argue the case for benefits that could then impact employee lives. With regards to the various employee feedback mechanisms, we mentioned employee resource group feedback, but also we found that social feedback channels, like we mentioned, word of mouth, informal feedback in Slack and such platforms could be really valuable, as well as entrance and exit interviews. For example, because looking at voluntary attrition and the different ways that benefits played a role in one's journey could also be valuable and unique moments of employees' lives to kind of capture that feedback from. And then finally, last but certainly not least, external sources such as vendors, external consultants, and more macro level market trends, kind of out of the company's control, but occurring in society, whether changes in social norms or structures. Those are all different ways of kind of measuring benefits up against what is currently occurring and seeing if they are still appropriate, doing well, and the like. So it's important to discuss the challenges, of course, associated with these various benefits metrics. So the challenges kind of boil down to three major areas: measuring impact, like I mentioned before, and data accessibility and vendor management. So when it comes to measuring impact, it's hard to know sometimes just how impactful benefits are. And we know that it's good to understand that, but we better want to capture that link between benefits and key outcomes such as productivity. So strategies to deal with that, for example, might be targeted focus groups or in-depth qualitative interviews for specific benefits to better capture sentiment and all those various factors in there. And then establish more process measures. So connecting that acute link between a benefit and the ways in which it's meant to kind of lead to that ultimate outcome of productivity, employee well-being, and the like. When it comes to that second major bucket of data accessibility, we know that there's a lot of data that we're dealing with, and that can occur or rather cause difficulties in actually visualizing that data and its quality and availability to us. Also concerns about health outcome data was something that came up as well. So strategies to navigate these various issues would be to determine these KPIs upfront, standardize key measures where possible, and determine key health claim data to kind of validate and add another way to make more rigorous measures of these various forms of data. And finally, for this last major bucket of just vendor management, we want to make sure that we can standardize all of those various measures. So although there might be the same terms such as engagement, it might be measured in a different way, right, at different vendors and even within the company itself. So that, as well as with data visualization from vendor data, the strategies to navigate that could be just building in-house data warehouses to kind of foster that ownership of the data that you're seeing, and then engage in fees of risk alterations such that there are performance guarantees regardless of how the metrics are defined, just once they're established upfront, to make sure that that risk can be mitigated. So speaking of the difficulty in measuring impact, we came across this thing that we label deep benefits. Benefits that are highly impactful, but might not be utilized broadly across employee populations. And so that led us to categorize benefits in these four different ways. So firstly, to just establish deep benefits, they are benefits, as I mentioned, that are high impact, low utilization across the employee population, examples being gender affirming procedures, adoption services, treatments for illness, cancer, et cetera. So these really impactful moments in employee lives that most employees might not experience. Ways to measure that being user impact in those various mechanisms like in-depth qualitative interviews, ultimately leading to things like employee testimonials. As you can see, it's all quite connected. And so coming across the benefits led us to these other three major areas. So these other areas, such as discretionary benefits, might be things that not all employees use, and they might not necessarily be life-changing, but foster everyday wellness, right? So things like employee discounts on cultural institutions, pet insurance, these different signature benefits that are kind of arising that might not be seen as essential, but play a role in kind of impacting the day-to-day experience. We also have core benefits, of course, at the bottom right here, where we see that there are things like healthcare, PTO that are parts of the employee experience that are considered to be critical and highly impactful, that are captured through our typical KPIs like utilization and engagement. At the bottom left there, we have everyday benefits that might not impact us drastically day to day, such as one's 401k. But we definitely track utilization of those, and ultimately down the line, as we know, they can be highly impactful. So that being said, the categories can be fluid, of course. For example, PTO might be highly impactful sometimes it's a day off. And sometimes it can be something like a family reunion where it is very, very highly impactful. So there's a range. So this can look different across categories for the employee. And these categories can look different depending on kind of the size and demographics and structure of one's organizations. But hopefully this framework kind of helps us frame future-facing benefits as we consider and try to formulate ways to measure and communicate the impact of these various benefit types.